In Episode 2, we learn what happened after European ships reached native land. This is the story of first contact, broken trust, and the beginning of Native American suffering. So let's start. When the ships reached the shore. The ocean was calm that morning. The water moved gently, reflecting the sky like a mirror, as native people stood along the shoreline, watching something they had never seen before. On the far edge of the horizon, dark shapes slowly grew larger. Tall wooden ships, carried by the wind, were approaching the land. Their white sails rose high above the water, unfamiliar and strange. Some watched in silence. Others spoke quietly among themselves, trying to understand what their eyes were seeing. No one knew that these ships carried the beginning of a tragedy that would change their world forever. As the ships moved closer, canoes gathered near the shore. Elders were called. Children clung to their mothers. Hunters stood alert but calm. There was curiosity, not fear. For generations, the ocean had been a boundary between worlds, and now that boundary was opening. When the ships finally stopped near the land, small boats were lowered into the water. Men climbed down, their bodies covered in heavy clothing, their skin pale, their faces hidden behind beards. They spoke loudly in unknown languages and pointed toward the shore as they rowed closer. When the Europeans stepped onto the sand, they knelt, touched the ground, and looked around as if they had reached a sacred place. To the native people watching, these actions seemed respectful. The strangers raised their hands to show they carried no weapons, and the first meeting passed without violence. Food was offered, water was shared, gifts were exchanged. Metal tools, colored cloth, and beads were handed over, while the native people responded with generosity, offering food, shelter, and guidance. In their world, hospitality was a moral duty, not a weakness. For days, the newcomers remained near the coast. They explored the land carefully, walking along rivers, touching trees, tasting fruit, and observing the people. They wrote constantly in their journals, sketching maps, recording details, and marking locations. Through gestures and broken communication, they asked about gold, about fertile land, about paths leading inland. The native people, unaware of the meaning behind these questions, answered openly. They believed the visitors were travelers who would eventually leave, just as others had in the past. But the strangers did not leave. As days turned into weeks, something began to change. Some native people fell ill. At first it seemed like a simple sickness, fever, coughing, weakness. Then the sickness spread faster than anyone had ever seen. Entire families became ill at the same time. Skin blistered, children cried through the night. Elders collapsed and did not rise again. The healers tried everything they knew, but nothing worked. The disease did not come from the land. It had come from the ships. Smallpox, measles, and influenza moved through villages like fire through dry grass. The native people had no immunity. Their bodies had never faced these illnesses before. In some communities, half the population died within months. In others, nearly everyone was gone. Homes stood empty. Fires burned out. The songs of daily life fell silent. The land, once full of voices, became quiet with death. While native communities mourned, more ships arrived. These ships did not come as guests. They came with soldiers, settlers, and supplies. They came to stay. Europeans began building permanent settlements near the coast, cutting down forests, draining wetlands, and claiming land. They planted flags in the soil and declared ownership in the name of distant kings and empires. To the native people, this idea made no sense. The land was not something to be owned. It was a living being, shared by all. But to the newcomers, land was power, wealth, and control. Tension grew as Europeans expanded outward. Native villages were pushed aside, hunting grounds were fenced off, rivers were claimed. When native leaders questioned these actions, they were given papers called treaties. The words promised peace, protection, and shared land. Many leaders signed, believing agreements would be honored. They were not. Time after time, treaties were broken as soon as more land was desired. When native people resisted, violence followed. Soldiers burned villages, crops were destroyed, food supplies were cut off. Starvation became a weapon. Some tribes fought back, defending their homes with courage and determination, despite facing guns, cannons, and endless reinforcements. These were not wars of conquest, they were wars of survival. As European colonies grew into nations, removal became policy. Native people were no longer seen as neighbors or allies, but as obstacles. They were forced from their ancestral lands and pushed westward, away from the coast, away from their homes, away from their ancestors' graves. Families were given little time to prepare. They carried what they could and left everything else behind. One of the most devastating chapters came in the 19th century during forced marches that history would later call relocation. For native people, it was a journey of suffering. Men, women, children, and elders were driven across hundreds of miles in brutal conditions. Many walked barefoot through snow and mud. Food was scarce. Disease followed them. Those who fell behind were left to die. Parents buried children along the road and continued walking because soldiers did not stop. This journey became known as the Trail of Tears. Thousands died along the way. Entire nations were shattered. Survivors were confined to reservations, often on land that could not support them. Promises of food, protection, and support were rarely kept. Poverty spread, hunger became common, and still the pressure did not end. Native children were taken from their families and sent to boarding schools where their hair was cut, their languages forbidden, and their identities punished. They were taught to be ashamed of who they were. Yet, despite everything, Native Americans did not disappear. They survived. In secret, they passed down stories, they whispered songs, they held ceremonies away from watching eyes. Leaders rose who refused to surrender their people's dignity. Resistance took many forms, not only in battle, but in memory, culture, and spirit. Today, the consequences of the ships that reached the shore are still visible. Many native communities face poverty, limited access to resources, and the long shadow of historical trauma. But there is resilience. Languages are being revived, traditions are being reclaimed, young generations are learning the truth of their history and carrying it forward with pride. The ships that arrived centuries ago changed the world. They brought death, loss, and injustice on an unimaginable scale. But they did not erase the first people of this land. Their survival is a testament to human strength, and their story is a reminder that progress built on suffering carries a heavy cost. This is not just a story of the past. It is a story that lives on in the land, in the people, and in the memory of a continent. And it is a story that must never be forgotten.